Hi there. Welcome to Falling Up Radio. My name is Michael Harris. I got to tell you, I have notes all over my desk here. I want to make sure that I don't miss anything. You know, Falling Up Radio is really about bringing guests that inspire all of us to, really live an awesome life. And, I want to get to our guest as soon as possible because he's got an incredible story. But I really want to encourage you to whatever it is for you, like create your dreams and your visions in your life exactly the way that you want it. And if something is going on in your life, change it. We can do quantum leaps. We can do shape shifting. I mean, why not? And before we get to our guests, I always have to do a little shout out for my own book, Falling Down, Getting Up. If you haven't got this book yet, you can go to the website. It's really easy. It's fallingdowngettingup.com. That's it. You get a free book sent to you. I just ask you to cover shipping. So anyway, let's get right away to our guest because I want to give as much time to him as possible. And I want to give you a little backstory on this. No pun intended. You'll understand it in a minute. But I met Michael almost 2 years ago, year and a half to 2 years ago, something like that. I've been an avid student of somebody named Dr. Sarno, which was head of clinical rehabilitation, NYU Medical Center. And Michael will talk more about it in a moment. But I saw this film coming out about him, and Michael was the producer. And I immediately figured out how to get a hold of Michael, and it just so happened to be that the film was being in the Bend Film Festival here in my hometown of Bend, Oregon. And it was just like, wow, and Michael and I hit it off, and the film played at the film festival, and I brought a couple hundred people because everybody had to see this incredible film. But before we get to all of that, I also want to talk more about Michael and who he is and what some of your life story is, because it's really fascinating to me, Michael. Anyway, welcome to the show.
Thank you. You bringing up the Bend Film Festival, that was just an incredible experience because A, you packed the theater, and B, it's a really kind of open town. And I don't know if you remember, but we had that just amazing experience where I had learned normally at film festivals, what you say is, does anybody have any questions about the filmmaking? But with this film, I've learned to say, does anybody have anything they want to say? Yeah. And a woman who was sitting in the handicap row raised her hand. And so I went over to her, and she was so moved, it took her a full minute to speak. And it was a really intense minute where we were just kind of staring at each other. And finally, she just said, I've had 25 surgeries. Yeah. I died on the table on the last one, and I had a do not resuscitate, but they woke me up anyway. I have one scheduled next week, but now I get it. Yeah. It was just so intense. and she walked out of there, and her whole being was so much lighter. It was really, that was one of the more intense experiences. But even after the film, I had 5 or 6 other experiences. Someone came up to me and they'd say, and what would happen a lot of times with the film is the film kind of brings up a lot of stuff for people, and then it's right here. Yeah. And so they walk up to you, and you're like, wow, it's right there. You can feel it too. It's just come up, and you say, I'm aware of that. And they're like, and that just helps it go. But yeah. They don't know what it is, but they do know what it is, and they just kind of need some to acknowledge that it's there, and then it goes. So that was just this incredible series of screenings there.
Yeah. You froze there for a moment, so I don't know whether it froze or not, but we'll see what happens. I want to get back to this story. I also want to touch on kind of a little bit about you. You started out as a photographer in college, as I understand, and then you and your wife Suki started making films together. And then how many films have you made over the years?
Close to a dozen.
A dozen.
About a dozen. It's, some are still not done, but almost done, but at least 10 that are out in the world. And you've received numerous rewards from different film festivals and different organizations. Yeah, a few. I mean, it's interesting because of the kind of work that we do. We have really had a hard time getting grants, but we've gotten one grant, and that was actually a Guggenheim grant, which is the only grant we ever got. Literally the only grant. It's crazy. but it's a good one. But it actually is not very useful unless you already are someone who's a professor, because then it means you get both a sabbatical probably and a raise. But if you don't have any salary, you don't get any raise.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really mean as much to us.
Yeah. Well, I just look across the banners of the films that I see that you've done, and there's normally a half a dozen or more awards attached to that particular film. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we do a lot of hustling.
Yeah.
A lot of trying to get them out there. It's a lot of work. So we both have to kind of make them and distribute them. And that can be kind of difficult. Like that's actually kind of, both times I've been stuck on the floor in pain. It's had to do with the fact that we made this film that's really important and really good, but no one will show it. And so that kind of that frustration and just pushing way past my own limits ends up slamming the floor. Thankfully, we've still had that same experience, but now I'm able to kind of deal with it really well.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about All the Rage and Dr. Sarno. And I want to mention before we actually get to the film itself, back in the 90s, I've been a student of yoga and a teacher of yoga for several decades now.
Right.
And having had my own health conditions, I've read a lot of different types of health books and pain books. And I came across Dr. Sarno's books in the 90s. And I went to my teachers, Bikram and Rajeshri, and I said, what is all this stuff about TMS? And they said, well, it's all yoga. We let go of the mind and, our body begins to heal and the pain begins to go away. And what Sarno really taught was a lot of the science and a lot of the research behind what the yogis had been saying for thousands of years. So that immediately hooked me in. And I read more of his books and I downloaded some of his stuff and some of the other doctors around him that supported that work as well. I looked at as well. And then when the film came out, it was just like, yes, there's a film. I was so excited about it. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about the film and what caused you to create this film? I mean, because I know something happened to you. I know what it is, but the listeners don't.
Yeah. Well, my father, when I was basically, I think in second grade or something, almost died of a bleeding ulcer. My father was a psychologist. So he got over the bleeding ulcer. I mean, I remember going to see him in the hospital. And a couple of weeks later, we had a very small fender bender. I mean, like almost a nothing accident. But then he got terrible whiplash that plagued him for years. And I would come home he'd come home from work, get a whiskey, and sit in this device that would lift up his neck or be laying on the floor. And in the early 80s, probably 10 years after that had happened, 8 or 9 years, when he'd been struggling, kind of ups and downs, someone gave him Dr. Sarno's book. And as a psychologist, he immediately got it, and he immediately got better. And my dad was not, it was kind of cheap, but he bought a box of the books, and he just gave them out to everybody who had pain whenever they did. So even when I was very young, it was kind of around. Probably like when I was.
Tell the listeners a little bit more who Dr. Sarno was?
Sure. So Dr. Sarno was a rehabilitation specialist, and he learned medicine in World War II, as basically an army medic. Then he went to medical school. But when he grew up, in the time that he was growing up, Freud was still very much in vogue. It's funny, I read a post the other day about The Wizard of Oz, which when Mencken wrote the book, it was like right around the time the interpretation of dreams came out. So it was way under the radar. But when the movie was made, it was very much in vogue. So all these Freudian ideas are much more steeped even in the movie. And the point of that is that he went to medical school, learned the medical things, but right at the time that was becoming much more mechanized and kind of like data-driven. But when he learned medicine, there was still really a deeper understanding of the psychological basis for many illnesses, the psychosomatic nature. So he did what he had been taught, which was the kind of the medical diagnosis and rehabilitation medicine in the 60s, which was like bed rest and physical therapy. And it was an inpatient program at the time. People with back pain would come to Rusk Institute for 3 weeks to 2 months to 4 months to get better, which is mostly about them getting this time to recuperate and kind of probably deal more psychologically than anyone realized. But he found as time went on, the things that he'd been taught weren't really seeming to help people. So he went to look at the data that supported it, and he found that there wasn't any. So then he went and he looked at his patients' charts, and he found that 80% of his patients had 2 or more other psychosomatic illnesses. So migraines, ulcers, eczema, other things that were known to be psychosomatic. So he started to talk to his patients and try to figure out what was going on in their lives. And he quickly noticed a pattern that many of them were very repressive of their emotions, but they were also what he would call goodists. They wanted to do for others. They were taking care of a sick parent. Their mother-in-law lived with them, things like that. And he would ask them, so your mother-in-law lives with you. How's that? He goes, oh, they say, oh, it's great. You know, she picks up the kids from school and it's really helpful. And he'd say, it must be also kind of difficult. Oh my God, it's awful. You know, like as soon as he'd open that door, that would be like, and then he would make the connection and their pain would go away.
Yeah.
So as he further developed this and worked on it and looked at it from that psychological perspective and the medical perspective. So for instance, people were coming in saying, I have this herniated disc. And he'd say, well, that doesn't make any sense because you have pain here and you have pain here. And if it was really that disc, it would only impinge here. It wouldn't bother this side. So that couldn't possibly explain why you have this pain. And he was right. But it took many, 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 many years for the science to catch up to him because no one was asking the questions that need to be asked because they'd made assumptions. And so now there's tons of data that supports what he said. But he was really dinged by his whole community and completely ignored because he wasn't doing randomized control trials and all of the things you're supposed to do as a scientist. But the thing to remember about randomized control trials is they control for the emotions. So in fact, they pretend that they don't exist because we can't really measure them and we can't really quantitate them. So we just say, okay, we're just going to control for them. I mean, we're going to ignore that they could be a factor because they're a wild card. Yeah. Which is, you know.
Yeah. Well, I know when I first started reading his books and going through some of my health issues, I mean, actually the smallest problem was my back pain, although it was debilitating at times and I couldn't move. What Sarno's books really helped me to do is to recognize that there was something psychological behind what was creating that pain, and that the pain was really more a symptom of an underlying issue rather than really the issue itself.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what he gets to, which is that the pain is often, so, you know, you brought up yoga before. So if you look at it from a yoga framing, it's exactly how you describe it. If you look at it from Dr. Sarno's framing, he sees the pain as a distraction from these repressed emotions, and that the pain is there to make sure that they don't come up. So it's your unconscious trying to protect you from these thoughts becoming part of the consciousness. Yeah. That's a great way to describe it. It's true. Yeah. But it's also true to think about it as the pain is actually trying to get your attention, to say, hey, you need to pay attention to this. Those are both accurate framings of it. What we have to understand is that there's something going on, and the pain should be, we can use it as a message. So it's a distraction if you're allowing it to distract you, but instead it can be a message if you allow yourself to listen to it.
Yeah. Now, what happened to you? I mean, I know something happened to you, and it's looked at in the film, but something happened to you, and then you created the film. Well, part of it was a journey of some of what happened, but
it was a long
when did you start experiencing some of this back pain or chronic pain?
So when I was in my early 20s, every now and then, 2, maybe 3 times a year, my back would go out, and I would be stuck on the floor for 2 or 3, 4 days. But I would always kind of recover from it, and then it would move on. Around that same time, after a couple years of that, my brother was in graduate school, and he was told, and he had such terrible hand pain. He was told he had RSI, he had this, he had that. He had an early version of kind of like speak and type that cost like, he got a grant of $5,000 to pay for it so that he could stay in graduate school because he couldn't do his research without it. And my dad kept saying, read Dr. Sarno, you got to read Dr. Sarno. But for him, it was like something about it was just too scary and it seemed unscientific. And finally, when they told him he had to carve away bone in his collarbone to free the nerves in his neck, my dad really just was like, go and see him or I'm not talking to you again. Really got angry.
And so you lived in the same city as Dr. Sarno.
I did, but my brother was at Princeton. I was in New York. My dad was in North Carolina. But my brother came in, saw Dr. Sarno, and 3 weeks later he called me up and he said, "Can I have my car back?" Because he'd given me his car. He couldn't drive. He was better.
His hands were so bad he couldn't even drive.
Couldn't drive. He couldn't type.
Wow.
And then he had to basically, he almost had to give up everything. So he got better. And at that point, I read the book and I banished my own back pain for 10 years. So I didn't have it. I got it. I mean, I read the book and I was like, that's me. I get it. Now I'd have a little twinge of back pain. I actually didn't even have the twinges of back pain because I had kind of circumvented the process. Fast forward 10 years, I had a house I was fixing up, no real job. I mean, I quit my job because I had a crazy 90s or my 20s. I was in a band. I didn't need much money. I lived cheaply. Then I was married and I had a house and a kid and a movie I'd completed that was really, I thought, quite important, and I couldn't get him to show it. All of those tensions together slammed me to the ground over a period of 6 months. It was slow. I knew it was happening. I went to my doctor and I said, "Listen, I know this is Dr. Sarno, but I'm in such great pain. Can you help me?" And he said, "Dr. Sarno's a quack. You go to physical therapy." It was like really difficult. So the guy in the coat is telling me, "That's bullshit. Go do this." And I was like, no. And I had this argument with him. And I was also arguing about the movie I was working on, which was in his neighborhood. And but I went because I didn't, I don't know. It wasn't working. I had read the book. It wasn't helping. I went to physical therapy. It got worse. I went and I had acupuncture and it got worse because I was not dealing with what was going on. And when it slammed me to the ground, I still didn't do anything. I didn't call.
Now, when you're saying that you weren't dealing with it, you were talking about you weren't dealing with the emotions, or?
I wasn't dealing with the emotions fully, even though I was trying. I didn't really know how to. And I had lost faith in it because I was trying to do that work and it wasn't working anymore. So the doubt creeps in. So one of the things that Dr. Sarno makes very clear is if you don't believe that your mind-body interaction is a causative factor, you're not gonna shift the process. It's gonna continue the same way it is. And so he basically, at a certain point, he decided he was going to phone interview everyone who was gonna come see him before they came. He'd say, "Can you buy the idea that your mind might be a causative factor?" And they'd say, "Absolutely not." He'd say, "You should go see someone else." You know, it's like, you're going to waste my time and your money. So it's, yes, you see someone else.
So he's just really clear about that.
Really clear, and it's really true. And so I ended up getting an MRI. I don't even know how I got to the MRI. I was in so much pain. And finally, my brother, now he was a professor and he had money. He said, "I'll pay for you to go," because it was kind of expensive. It was $1,000 and I didn't really have it. And it just, and I didn't, even if I had it, I didn't think I deserved it, right? How am I going to spend $1,000 on that, So I went, and I didn't have a miraculous cure, but his force of belief, and he pointed out this MRI is bullshit. I slowly started to get better. And at that point,
Dr. Sarno said it was bullshit.
That this MRI doesn't show anything. Like, this is nothing. And that's not even where your pain is. This is ridiculous. And even as I was seeing him, I was thinking, I need to make a movie about him. And we had just finished our first major documentary. It was kind of following a character doing stuff. And so I sent it to him, and he liked it. And he said, "Sure, you can make a documentary."
Wow.
But I didn't know how to make that movie. Because what we did was we followed people, something believed in, against incredible odds. That's what we wanted to do. He wasn't fighting. He'd kind of given up.
Yeah.
He was like, take it or leave it. And so he said, "Okay, I've got this book coming out, The Divided Mind," which was his last big book. I was like, "Great, we'll film that process." So we kind of did some interviews that weren't really meant to be in the film. They were more research interviews. We tried to find some patients to bring to him, but that wasn't really working because nobody wanted to spend $1,000. And there was so much resistance to it. We applied for all these grants. Nobody wanted to help. So over 2 years, we shot 5 hours of tape, which, if you know my documentary, is nothing. Like, it was just nothing. Yeah. It was just a couple of interviews where maybe my intern was filming as I was just discussing with him, because we were waiting to film in action. We didn't want to do a talking head interview movie. And we just couldn't figure out how to make it. So it slowly kind of petered out. And at a certain point, we're like, didn't know what to do. Because actually I called him up. I said, "So when's the book coming out? Maybe we can film like the book events and film." He said, "Oh, it came out." "You didn't do any book event?" "Oh, no, I don't do any of that mess." So I was like,
Well,
So
in that book, The Divided Mind, really, I mean, it took it from the idea of the back and the chronic pain in that way, and really looked at it as what would you call it? An overall
holistic.
holistic,
Yes.
really a scientific view of
Right. It was
pain and
more for
health.
practitioners.
Yeah.
See, he wrote his first books because he was talking to other practitioners about it and they were just ignoring him. And he wasn't doing the kind of studies that would get published. I mean, he had some papers published about it, but it wasn't the kind of thing that would cause heat. So he realized he actually had a patient who was a book agent. And, she suggested, he said, I was waiting for you to ask. But he knew he needed to bring it directly to the people. So his first books are very populist. They're storytelling. They're not science oriented. So The Divided Mind is really the science oriented book. People often ask me, what book should I read? And I was like, well, it depends on who you are. If you need the proof, read The Divided Mind. If you like to go to the movies and you like to read stories, read that one. It's just, how is it going to affect you emotionally?
Yeah. And I got to tell you that one of the other books that really affected me was The Great Pain Deception.
Right.
And I read that book, and Stephen Osanich, and I read that book and I went, dude, how are you even alive? I mean, everything that happened to him. And then he came around and met Dr. Sarno and had this amazing recovery from, you name it. I mean, it was like 26 different things. It was just like phenomenal.
Yeah. I mean, he had a lot of rage and a lot of repression. And when he kind of learned to recognize that, it often is very curative,
Yeah.
But it's really hard to recognize it. I mean, we build up so many ways to distract ourselves, or so much dissonance from it. We don't want to feel it. And so it can be very difficult to get to, which, so, I'll just continue that story, but so we couldn't make that movie about Dr. Sarno. It was just kind of on hold. And the pain had started for me while I started a movie called Battle for Brooklyn. And it took us 9 years to make that. And when that film was done, it did really well at the first festival we brought it to. It did really well in New York, and then no one else would show it. And just the frustration of no other festival showing it, no other theater showing it. I just kept driving and trying to make it happen, and eventually it just slammed me to the floor. And when it did, I literally screamed, grab the fucking camera, because I knew in that moment that we had to make the movie, and that the only real way to make it was if I was willing to be the character in it.
So when you say you grabbed the camera, you were literally lying on the floor in pain when that was happening.
I wasn't lying on the floor. I was screaming and writhing, and my eyes were rolling back in my head. It was so bad. But I knew that it had to be captured in that moment, and that I would have to document. And it ended up being stuck on my office floor for like 27 days. I literally could not stand up for that long. But I immediately started back just trying to push myself beyond my own capacity. I didn't allow myself to rest. I was having all kinds of epiphanies and trying to push myself to get better really quickly, because we had finally, just before it happened, gotten invited by Michael Moore to show it at his festival.
Wow.
And I couldn't walk. I mean, I couldn't sit up. So I decided I was going to crawl to a cab and get taken to the airport. I mean, I literally, with my wife and kids, it literally took me 20 minutes to get out of the house, but I was determined to get there. We got to the airport. I made it to the gate. I mean, I was in so much pain. I took a couple like muscle relaxants, but I was going to make it. I got to the gate and they're like, dude, you are not getting on this plane. If you can't sit in the seat and put on your seatbelt and you can't walk yourself on that plane, you're not getting on the plane.
So the airline wouldn't let you on.
They saw how sick I was. I couldn't see it. And then getting back home was so hard. It was, so that stuff is not in the movie because we didn't film that. But after I didn't make it, my friend had to come over because my wife did go the next day, bought another ticket and just went by herself. Someone had to go. But that's how intense this kind of pressure we can put on ourselves to push ourselves beyond our capacity. And so that was a setback, but I also realized what it was. It was me just not allowing myself to heal. you know, and taking on too much.
Yeah.
You know, crazy.
Yeah. Now, the beginning of the movie starts out with a couple of fairly well-known people, Larry David,
and Howard Stern.
And how'd you connect with them? Because I mean, they really they had experienced some chronic pain and gone to Sarno and had a great deal of relief. So how did that come about?
So, well, we knew about Howard Stern because more people know about Dr. Sarno because of Howard Stern than anyone else. But it took 5 years to get them to agree to do it. And what it took was finally, actually, my partner David interviewed Don Buchwald, who is Howard Stern's agent, because he finally got to Don Buchwald through his sister, helped him make some contact. And Don's like, it's not going to happen. And so he said, well, can we interview you? So they went and interviewed him. And then afterwards, it was, well, you know, what can we do? He's like, all right, you know, you got to get Howard. All right, I'll ask him. Because he'd never even asked him. So 2 days later, we got a call saying, okay, you know, you get 5 minutes this day next week. So he gave us 12, but it was all 12 usable minutes.
Yeah.
And then with Larry David, he'd never actually talked about it publicly, but we were working on a series of political shorts, and we were interviewing Chelsea Clinton for these young guys who had gotten money to do this stuff. And the kid was 21 years old, could barely stand up. And we're like, you know, you need to call Dr. Sarno. He said, oh my God, when we filmed that stuff with Larry David last week, he called that guy. So that's how we knew he was a patient, and we were able to just kind of reach out. And he probably assumed that Dr. Sarno had sent us, but it was just that we had that knowledge.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, a week or two after I got up off the floor, I was writing down all the people we needed to interview. And one of them was Dr. Andrew Weil. So I wrote down Andrew Weil's name. 10 minutes later, I got a call from another parent at my kid's school who did video work and said, I know you guys do video work. Can you maybe shoot this Andrew Weil piece for us in a couple of weeks? Like literally, it was so weird.
Wow.
And so I was able to meet Andrew Weil and get his card, and that's how we were able to get. It took another 2 years after that to arrange the time to do it, but without those kind of weird synergistic elements, you know, these things, it's weird.
And there was some Senate hearings as well too with Dr. Sarno. Can you maybe talk about that a little bit? Yeah.
So early on, Dr. Sarno was a very, very private person. So even though he had saved Senator Harkin in 2000, he would say, I have a senator who might be, he wouldn't tell me who it was. He wouldn't make it possible because that was confidential, right? So he wouldn't do it. He was very above board in every way. Very different than most people are today. But when that Senate hearing happened, he did thankfully tell me about it. So I went down with him, but Dr. Harkin actually requested that there be a study on pain because he was head of the
Senator Harkin.
Senator Harkin, right. Yeah. He requested this study, and it took several years, but in 2011, the study came out, and what it found was that there were, they studied 10 different treatment methods, and what they found is that none of the treatment methods currently in use for pain work. None. None of them show scientific proof of working. And further, that the cost of chronic pain had gone from $56 billion a year in 1986 to $210 billion in 2001 to $500 in 2010 to $636 in 2011. So you can just imagine what that S-curve looks like now, right? It's just like, exponential.
Oh, and how much of that was opiates and other pharmaceutical pain medication?
Well, I'm sure that was part of the problem, but it's chicken and egg, right? It was like the opiates are following the pain. But what we actually detail in the film is we put two charts on top of each other. One is the rise in the wealth gap, and the other is the rise in chronic pain. And they track exactly. So as the wealth gap increases, so does the pain. And, that's not scientific confirmation data, but it does tell us something about those expectations that we have for ourselves, the stories we tell about ourselves, that we should be doing better than our parents. We should be, these expectations we have, and that we don't live up to them. We feel like failures, and we put ourselves under pressure to be perfect, good, successful. And when we don't reach those goals, it can be enervating in this really deep way that we're not conscious of, and that can cause pain. So, I mean, if you really look at it like that, Now, what's interesting is, so we had, on the panel, he had 4 or 5 other experts, but Senator Harkin insisted that Dr. Sarno be on the panel, and the whole panel that he had was like, why are we not paying attention to this? And it was a really profound moment that gave us somewhat of a heroic ending to the movie, thankfully.
Yeah.
Because he was really largely ignored and dismissed by all of his colleagues.
Yeah. Now, Dr. Sarno, correct me if I have the dates a little bit wrong here, but Dr. Sarno passed away at 94, the day before the premiere in New York. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think he passed away maybe at 93, but the following day was going to be his 94th birthday. Okay. And we didn't even know this, but it was the night that it opened. So he died the day before it opened.
Wow.
And the obituary ran on the Sunday of the opening weekend. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was a pretty intense. One of the things that pushed me beyond my capacity was I did a question and answer at the previous film we opened at the same theater called Battle for Brooklyn. So that was like, and I could barely walk. I was having all this hip pain. It was so bad. But I literally went to every screening to do the Q&A because I wanted to make sure that people understood how important the opening weekend was.
Yeah.
And so I did the same thing in New York, and I was fine this time because I was for the Dr. Sarno movie. But it was really intense because on Saturday morning, we found out. But by the afternoon, other people had found out and brought it up in the Q&As. So it wasn't our place to say anything because it wasn't public. But if someone else brought it up, we would acknowledge it.
Yeah.
But it was very intense to be having that experience in that weekend. But also, so many people also came because they did find out and they wanted to see it and wanted to be with other people.
Yeah. Now, I heard also Dr. Sarno mention in the film that he was probably one of the people that suffered just as much as anybody else from TMS.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's how he understood it. It's like he understood what was going on. But in his own case, almost once he knew about this, once these issues would come up, he would go and he would meditate on it, think about it, and he could usually figure out the thing that he was repressing and he could get it to go away. But he did suffer from these things. And I think, one of the things that happens in our film is my father retired and literally fell apart again. And I think one of those things that happens a lot for people is their sense of themselves, their agency, their power has to do with the work that they do. And when they retire, they feel powerless. And there's a lot of rage that happens. And if it's not dealt with, it can really bring back up stuff that had been going on earlier in one's life. And I think it's really important to acknowledge this and know about it. And he did know about it, wasn't really able to deal with his own stuff. And essentially that's what hurt him. And I think the same thing is true with Dr. Sarno. His memory had started to go well before he retired. But he was spot on in the office and he just knew what he was talking about. It was the things outside of that work that was where the things happened. And when he stopped doing that work, he lost a lot of capacity. He was in the hospital much of the next year with a broken hip and all kinds of heart problems and things.
Yeah, yeah. Now, there's a number of doctors today that continue to practice with what they learned from Dr. Sarno.
Right.
Some different people around the country. Is there any type of movement going on, so to speak, of people or doctors taking a look at this type of work and helping with the patient?
Absolutely. You have Dr. Schubiner, Howard Schubiner is doing a study right now with a major pain specialist that is showing incredible results in Boulder. You have Dr. Clark, who works with Dr. Schubiner with the PPDA, which is the Pathophysiological Disorder Association. Dr. Clark discovered all of these issues with the gut. He works in Portland as a gastroenterologist, and his book is called "They Can't Find Anything Wrong."
Yeah.
Because when there's no physical signal as to what's going on, oftentimes you still have terrible gut issues. And when he found that when he started to talk to patients, just much like Dr. Sarno, he was able to figure out what the story was, and then they would improve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's somebody in Los Angeles too, isn't there?
Well, there's Dr. Schechter.
Right.
Dr. David Schechter, who worked with Dr. Sarno, but he's also connected with the pain psychology clinic there. And so a lot of his patients go there, and that pain psychology clinic is run by Alan Gordon. It's also very successful in treating patients. I think they have something like 30 therapists working there now.
Yeah. Now, I know this goes down a whole nother rabbit hole, but I look at Dr. Sarno's work and some other people's work, And I think about the issues that we have today in our country about healthcare and the cost of healthcare and everything else. And there's a doctor that I know that he was clinical staff president of 5 hospitals, 600 doctors. And he said, if people, you know, did yoga and did Dr. Sarno's type thinking, he said, we could close 4 out of 5 hospitals.
Yeah, I think it's true. Let me turn on the light. It's gotten dark in here because I don't have any lights. Yeah. Yes. Let me see if that helps you out here. That's a little better, right?
Perfect.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No worries.
It was bright out when we started. Yeah, it's a problem. I mean, I think there's 2 things. Capitalism is a problem because it puts all this pressure on us. I mean, I was thinking about this just yesterday. You know, why is it so much worse now? Why is it so much worse for the kids? I mean, they're literally getting hundreds of messages every day that say, you're not good enough and you need this to make you better. Let me sell you this. Let me sell you that so that you can be better. And so they're constantly being told they're not good enough. And we've all been dealing with that for years, but the science of the ability to kind of undermine people is greater.
Yeah.
But also it's those same forces that run a capitalist medical system, which is it's really profit driven.
Yeah.
You know, doctors get paid inordinate sums. They also get charged inordinate sums to become doctors. And I think many of them are less thinking of the healing arts and how do I have a successful career? And in order to have a successful career, you have to go with the program. In order to go with the program, you have to accept things that are terrible. You have to be willfully blind to the things that you're being taught aren't true. Because if you go to your advisor and say, I think this thing you're teaching me isn't true, they'll say, well, maybe you need another advisor. Maybe you need to be in another program. So there's these kind of like perverse incentives to just go along, go with the flow and go with the program, even when the program isn't working.
Yeah. Well, I know too, somebody here locally where I live, that is a physician in a pain clinic with some other doctors and is very familiar with Dr. Sarno's work, understands how it works, yet, you know, they're still doing injections all the time and, you know, the traditional pain methods.
Right.
And I said, well, why are you doing that? And, you know, the response was that they were doing it because that's what their patients wanted.
Exactly. But it's kind of like if you have a bratty child and the bratty child doesn't want to put on their diaper at bedtime and you agree to let them go to sleep without the diaper and they pee all over the bed, whose fault is it?
Yeah.
You know, if you let the inmates run the asylum, then the asylum's going to be a nut house.
Yeah. Well, it's part of it that the economics that you mentioned, you know, there's that fear, I think, by many physicians that if they don't do the traditional way, they're not going to earn any income. And I know that was a issue with Dr. Sarno and some of the other doctors as well that practice this type of medicine.
Right. But I think then you have someone, and I'm forgetting his name right now, but there's a guy in Chicago. My brain, once I turn close to 50, I forget names a lot. But he left his hospital and started his own clinic because they weren't referring people to his TMS program. And now that he has the clinic open, he's doing really quite well, but he had to just take that risk. Yeah. Because obviously patients tell other patients that this really works. Yeah. Especially if he needs that to happen. Yeah. The whole system is completely insane, really. You know, if we know that the things that we're doing don't work and we continue to double down on them, you know, should we be holding these people up as experts? I mean, there was a study from the Lancet that somebody posted yesterday that said that people who are experts on back pain actually know less about back pain than people who are not in terms of the medical field, because they're so stuck in what they want to know that they ignore the counterfactual data that says that things they're doing aren't working. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I know too, you know, it's mentioned in your film too, the ACE study, the adverse childhood experience. Right. And I've delved into that and there's an organization here where I live that deals a lot with that. And there's a lecture series recently about it. And when you dive into that and understand that process, that etiology of what happens as a child and, you know, even 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, 12 months old, manifests itself later on, maybe at 30, 40 years old in back pain.
Right. Or heart disease, or cancer, or obesity. I mean,
Depression, addiction, all of it.
all of these terms. I mean, so they're all like, I think one of the things that, all right, so the last line of All the Rage is the day that Dr. Sarno is retiring. He's gotten this book that says, "Thank you, Dr. Sarno."
Mm-hmm.
And he just looks up at me and he says, it all comes down to one simple idea, that the mind and the body are intimately related. That's it. That's the whole story. And it's the last line because it's true. It is the whole story. And it's the kind of over idea of specialization or specification that we kind of constantly have, like it's this or it's that, when really the truth is about balance, is that the mind and the body are literally not the mind and the body. The mind and the body are the mind body. There's no separation. And when we try to kind of talk about it in ways that demand separation or pretend that, like for instance, that the emotions don't exist or matter, it's literally insanity. I mean, it's crazy talk. I mean, and so much of what we need to do in this work is really go back to that very simple idea. Now, some people become very focused on like doing it the right way, and there's one way. It's really simple.
Yeah. The
mind and the body are intimately related. And once you've recognized that and you pay attention to what your body is telling you, because the Dr. Sarno again saw it as distraction, which is how it acts until you turn around and look at it. And then it's a message. Yeah. Once you stop allowing it to be a distraction, you turn to a message, you start listening to it. It's just like a kid who's having a freak out. If you yell at the kid for having the freak out, the kid's going to keep freaking out. But if the kid's having a freak out and you get down, you give it your undivided attention, the whole thing goes like this. And the same, the body is dying for your attention. It needs you to know that you're repressing this thing. And it's literally just recognizing it oftentimes. Leads like that, you know?
Well, even as a yoga teacher, I mean, there's, the yoga or anatomy of yoga, and then there's the mind-body aspects, so to speak, of yoga.
Right.
And I've tended to focus more on the mind aspect of yoga rather than the precise position that you should be in a particular posture.
Right.
And that interaction about what's going on here in relationship to the whole being, and I've had students that I've brought up the Dr. Sarno ideas with, and some of them were resistant, I'll say highly resistant. And then I also had some that I was able to bring it up in 10 or 20 years of back pain was gone overnight.
Yeah.
Once they understood that aspect of what was going on in the unconscious and the subconscious that was manifesting itself, in the physical.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and the hard thing is like those stories are really powerful, but then other people interpret and say, well, I didn't have that, so therefore I don't have TMS or I don't have this thing. Instead of going, oh, I'm really not getting there yet. I'm on this journey and it's going to be, for me, it might be a long journey, but if I stay on that journey, I'm going to reach that point. It's really important that everybody realize that they have their own path. So even that woman that we were talking about at that screening, she had her own path, right? Yeah. And that was the moment she reached a plateau in that path where she was going to go somewhere. Now she's on her way towards another goal, but it took her a long time. She needed that moment. And when she got there, it was clear she was on her way, but it took a long time to get there.
Yeah. And it does sometimes. Absolutely. Yeah. So as we're coming to the end of our discussion today, first of all, it's been really great. And I'd love to have you come back. I know we could have many, many, many discussions surrounding this.
We should just start the Mike and Mike podcast.
There you go. Where can the listeners see your movie, your film?
Right. Well, it's on alltheragedoc.com right now. The name of the title of the movie spelled out with DOC as in documentary.com. And it's on Vimeo on demand, but in a couple of weeks, it'll be up on Amazon and iTunes as well, which will make it a lot more accessible to people.
Wow, that's great. So just search it online and then they'll be able to find
Yeah,
it.
if they just search for All the Rage movie, All the Rage doc, they'll find our site.
Yeah. And then other than that, do you have any suggestions for anybody that may want to explore more, or maybe right now?
They can order your book. I think it would help.
Oh,
and it's
Falling
free.
Down, Getting Up.
It's a great book. I'm having my daughter read it. You know, I think it's important for everyone to read all of these different stories. So there's two things about that. I think it's important to read a lot. It's also important to let go of the things that you read, to take in what's important and not think that each thing is the way to do it or the path. Everyone has their own path. We have on our Facebook page a lot of other videos and outtakes from the movie. So it's just All the Rage, or I think it's The Story of Pain on Facebook, but if you search for All the Rage, it should come up. And you know, there's so many resources. And once someone gets into it, the problem is not that the resources aren't there. It's that they maybe distract themselves with the resources. So I think the thing that I found to be really important is journaling and meditation. And actually, I was going to write a post tonight about how people should spend all of December starting to practice and try out meditation, so that when they make it their New Year's resolution, they don't start and say, I can't do this, that they've failed a little bit. Like meditation is both so simple and so hard for people, but it really does require us to become response able, as Dr. Gabor Mate says. You know, that we oftentimes people hear, oh, you know, that the pain is caused by your emotions, then they feel like you're saying that they're responsible for it. Well, what he says is that you should look at it as being able to respond. So if you know what role your emotions play, then you can respond to that. If you're blind to it, you can't do much. So the more that you look to your emotions, the more able you are to respond. You know, and on that level, I would say, I think some of the greatest advice I ever got was to do Michael Brown's The Presence Process meditation, which is a 10-week program. It's a simple book. It's cheap on Amazon, but it's really profound. And when I say responsible, each week you go a little bit deeper. And in week 3, you're taught that when you feel angry, you need to kind of step out of a situation and realize that that anger is about your own framing, that you're responsible for that. Even though someone made you angry, you own that anger. And it has something to do with your own expectation, your own judgment, self-judgment, judgment about how other people should be. And if you can go to kind of a deeper empathetic place for yourself, you can kind of let go of that. And you actually find yourself having increasingly less conflict and much more resolution. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah. Okay, let's, again, I want to make sure I've got all these notes. I want to make sure that covered everything. I think that we did. Again, the listeners, they can go, and I'll post this to alltheragedoc.com to see the film. And again, Michael, I really want to thank you for being here. And, you know, I think sometimes in life, our experiences, our challenge, our difficulties, perhaps are there for us to overcome them, to help other people along the journey too, for when that makes sense to them. So even though you were withering on the floor for 26 or 27 days, you know, what came out of it was this really incredible film. And I think I probably have watched it 8 or 9 times at least. And every time I watch it, I get something else out of it.
It's great to hear. Yeah, it's interesting though. It doesn't do what people expect from a film, so people have a hard time with it. You know, the world is a very strange place. That's what I'll say. And so when we want what we expect, and if we don't get what we expect, then we're often upset. But I'll say the thing about the film is I didn't want to make a personal film, but as we made it, it became increasingly clear that that was the way to help other people connect with their own emotions. And that's what's made it really successful in terms of healing people, you know, so it's great.
Well, thank you for doing that. And thank you for the willingness to go through the pain to get to the film. And thank you for all that you do. It's really appreciated. Absolutely. You know, so again, this is Michael Galinsky. I call you a prolific documentary film producer and director. So keep doing all the great work that you're doing. And I'd love to, again, have another discussion again and have you back on and perhaps find some areas that we can dive deeper into.
I'll see you in a couple weeks.
Sounds sounds good. Again, everybody go to alltheragedoc.com and we'll see you soon. Talk to you later.
Okay. And next time we'll discuss your book.
Yeah, there you go.